the key point here, which again, the mainstream media won't pay attention to, which is Russia actually claimed to have had very negative and derogatory information about Hillary Clinton. That if they had chosen to release that in the weeks leading up to that November 2016 election, it would have very likely had a devastating.
The moment Tulsi Gabbard set her sights on Hillary Clinton, it was like watching a calm surgeon walk in for the operation, scalpel in hand, with no wasted movements and no unnecessary drama. Unlike Hillary, who has spent her career as if auditioning for the role of history's most misunderstood villain, Tulsi has always had the rare ability to cut through the thick fog of political nonsense with just a few words. And with Hillary, there is an endless supply of nonsense to work with.
In fact, this report shows Putin held back from leaking compromising material on Hillary Clinton prior to the election, instead planning to release it after the election to weaken what Moscow viewed as an inevitable Clinton presidency. In the January 2017 intelligence community assessment that President Obama ordered, John Brennan, who was CIA director at the time, and the intelligence community intentionally suppressed intelligence that showed Putin was saving the most damaging material that he had in his possession about Hillary Clinton.
Gabbard doesn't even need to exaggerate because Hillary practically roasts herself every time she tries to reinvent her legacy. Hillary Clinton's career has been one long drawn-out advertisement for how to fail upward, and from First Lady, to Senator, to Secretary of State, to presidential candidate, she has somehow managed to touch every rung of the political ladder while leaving behind a trail of scandals, disasters, and awkward moments that would ruin any other politician for good.
That essentially the documents that Russia claimed they had portrayed Hillary Clinton as having mental health challenges that would result in fits of laughter and fits of rage. It also pointed out some very specific physical health concerns that apparently leaders within the DNC were discussing amongst each other.
That's right. This wasn't invented intelligence like the Steele dossier. This was supposedly emails within the DNC
and communication amongst.
She treats political disgrace the way a cat treats knocking things off the counter, as if it's a hobby, something expected, and then she acts offended when someone dares to point it out. Tulsi Gabbard takes that entire narrative, turns it around, and exposes it for what it really is, the story of someone who has been handed every opportunity and still managed to fumble each one like a quarterback with buttered hands. Hillary has been in politics longer than most voters have been alive, and yet her greatest achievement seems to be proving that name recognition alone can keep a career on life support.
Into great detail about the information that Russia and Putin had on Hillary Clinton, which included possible criminal acts, like secret meetings with multiple named U.S. religious organizations in which State Department officials offered, in exchange for supporting Secretary Clinton's campaign for the presidency, significant increases in financing from the State Department.
Take the infamous 2016 election, where the Democrats had every advantage, with money, media, cultural elites, and Hillary's favorite accessory, a Rolodex full of high-powered friends, and yet she lost to Donald Trump, the man the media insisted was unelectable. That defeat wasn't just a political loss, it was the Super Bowl of political incompetence, and Tulsi drives that point home by reminding people that Hillary didn't just stumble at the finish line. She tripped, face-planted, and then blamed the track for being uneven. But Hillary's defeat was not some fluke.
That November 2016 election, the fact is, the opposite is true. It was intentionally withheld and not released because they assumed that Hillary Clinton would win that election. And their plan, according to these documents that were found in an investigation the House Intelligence Committee conducted into the CIA's creation of this January 27th.
It was the culmination of decades of arrogance and tone deafness. And Tulsi doesn't need to shout it. She just points to the facts. Hillary thought the Rust Belt was a tourist attraction instead of a voting bloc, and she treated working-class Americans like an afterthought while basking in the glow of Hollywood fundraisers. She strutted around as if the presidency was her birthright rather than something to be earned. And when voters disagreed, she had the audacity to call them deplorable.
Also had documents that showed the patronage of the State Department to State Department employees who would go and support Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. There were high-level DNC emails that detailed evidence of Hillary's, quote, psycho-emotional problems, uncontrolled fits of anger, aggression, and cheerfulness, and that then Secretary Clinton was allegedly on a daily regimen of heavy.
Tulsi cuts through that moment like a hot knife through butter, because it's the perfect example of who Hillary is. A woman so entitled she couldn't imagine that regular people might not want to hand her the keys to the Oval Office. Then there is Hillary's time as Secretary of State, which Tulsi treats like a buffet of blunders. Benghazi, for instance, isn't just a word. It's a permanent stain on her record, where Americans died under her watch, and her response was a mix of excuses, deflections, and condescension. She sat before Congress dodging accountability with the smugness of someone who truly believes the rules don't apply to her. And for Tulsi, who served in uniform, the cold detachment of Hillary's response is more than political, it's personal. Let's not forget the email scandal, a saga that perfectly showed Hillary's career-long attitude toward transparency and accountability. Wiping servers, deleting emails, and setting up private systems like a secret spy novel gone wrong, turning nothing to hide into a punchline.
Foreign policy has been a disaster for our country and the world. It's resulted in the deaths and injuries of so many of my brothers and sisters in uniform. It's devastated entire countries, millions of lives lost. Yet, despite this damage that you have done to our country and the world, you want to continue your failed policies, directly or indirectly through the Democratic nominee.
She acted as if security protocols were just suggestions, optional checkboxes she could ignore simply because she was Hillary. Tulsi exposes this for what it really was: arrogance disguised as convenience. The same arrogance that cost her trust, cost her credibility, and ultimately cost her the White House. The irony of Hillary Clinton is that she has spent her entire career painting herself as a champion of women. Yet Tulsi Gabbard shows how her record tells a very different story. Hillary has used feminism like a prop instead of a principle, presenting herself as a glass ceiling breaker, but only when it served her ambitions. Tulsi strips away that facade with surgical precision, exposing the hypocrisy of someone who preaches empowerment but practices suppression when it is politically convenient. And speaking of Bill Clinton, Hillary has carried his baggage like a Louis Vuitton suitcase with a broken handle, because no matter how hard she tries to rebrand herself, she cannot escape the shadow of her husband's scandals.
That the Democratic Party leaders, people like Hillary Clinton, people who've been in charge for a very long time, foment this kind of culture of fear and like, hey, if you go against us, like, you're dead, 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 you're dead.
Career has always been tied to cleaning up after Bill's scandals, or at least trying to spin them into something less damaging. Hillary never truly stood as her own independent figure, because her entire rise is tied to the Clinton brand, which has always been less about public service and more about self-preservation. Her foreign policy record is another goldmine for Tulsi. From cheerleading the Iraq War to pushing for regime change in Libya, Hillary has left behind a trail of chaos. Tulsi, who has spent years warning against endless wars and reckless interventions, calls out Hillary's hawkish tendencies with the credibility of someone who has actually been to the battlefield, while Hillary has treated war like a board game, pushing a few pieces around, toppling a dictator, and then acting surprised when the region erupts into chaos. Libya didn't just collapse after Gaddafi. It became a failed state, a breeding ground for terrorism, and a humanitarian disaster. And yet, Hillary smirked on camera, almost proud of her handiwork. Tulsi drives this point home by contrasting real sacrifice with Hillary's careless foreign policy misadventures.
It's time for you to acknowledge the damage that you've caused. And it is long past time for you to step down from your throne so that the Democratic Party can lead with a new foreign policy, which will actually be in the interest of and benefit to the American people and the world.
Joining us now with reaction, Congresswoman, 2020 Democratic candidate, war veteran herself, Tulsi Gabbard. Congresswoman, first, thank you for serving your country. And
career has always been tied to cleaning up, but perhaps Tulsi's most devastating blow is aimed at Hillary's refusal to accept responsibility. Because every failure, every scandal, and every setback is always someone else's fault. Whether it's the Russians, James Comey, sexism, the media, or the Electoral College. Hillary has blamed everyone and everything except herself, and Tulsi shines a spotlight on this endless blame game, exposing it as the behavior of someone who sees herself as always above reproach. Hillary Clinton represents everything Americans claim to hate about politics, including corruption, entitlement, double standards, and the endless recycling of failed leadership. And Tulsi Gabbard dismantles this myth of inevitability by showing that Hillary is not a symbol of progress, but of stagnation. She is the embodiment of an establishment that values power over principle, connections over competence, and excuses over accountability.
What's Hillary Clinton like? You're probably the only person in this room who would know.
It wouldn't surprise you to know that she's not too fond of me.
She hates you like the devil hates holy water.
So when I resigned as vice chair of the DNC in 2016, specifically so that I could campaign against Hillary Clinton in that Democratic primary.
At the end of the day, Tulsi Gabbard doesn't just roast Hillary Clinton. She unravels the mythology around her by stripping away the spin, the excuses, and the endless attempts at reinvention. What remains is not the fearless feminist icon or the master strategist Hillary so badly wants to be seen as, but a politician whose career is a case study in failure, whose legacy is built on missteps, and whose greatest contribution to history will be proving that no amount of power, influence, or media support can overcome the simple truth that you can't sell what the people aren't buying. And Tulsi leaves it open because Hillary, true to form, will always try to stage a comeback, which only gives Gabbard more material to break down, more myths to shatter, and more hypocrisy to expose. Tulsi doesn't just point this out, she methodically proves it, showing how Hillary's attempts to stay relevant only highlight what she has lost: trust, credibility, relevance, and most cruelly, the momentum reformists once thought she stood for.
That's exactly right.
What do you know
if
about
you
that?
remember when we go back and Hillary Clinton's emails were really making headlines in a lot of ways and for a lot of reasons.
Her missing emails.
Yes, exactly. And so when people look at the newly declassified Durham appendix, you'll see a number of quite shocking statements in there coming from people like then DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, talking about how, and I'm paraphrasing here, but Hillary Clinton's emails were deleted just in time.
At the end of the day, Tulsi Gabbard doesn't just roast Hillary Clinton. She breaks apart the mythology built around her and strips away the spin, the excuses, and the endless attempts at reinvention. What remains is not the fearless feminist icon or the master strategist Hillary so badly wants to be seen as, but a politician whose career is a lesson in failure, whose legacy is made of mistakes, and whose biggest mark in history will be proving that no level of power, influence, or media support can defeat a simple truth: you cannot sell what the people do not want to buy. Tulsi leaves it open because Hillary, true to her nature, will always try to return, which only gives Gabbard more material to take apart, more myths to break, and more hypocrisy to reveal. Tulsi doesn't just point this out, she carefully proves it by showing that Hillary's attempts to remain important only underline what she has lost: trust, credibility, relevance, and most crucially, the momentum reformers once believed she stood for.
I was at, I think it was the first debate, the first primary debate that they had, first or second, it was one of the early ones. And I was doing an interview with MSNBC outside the hall of the debate. I think it was in Miami. And I don't remember who the host was, but I could see them and hear them in my ear. And they said, "Tulsi Gabbard, you're coming out and criticizing Hillary Clinton and her foreign policy record. Aren't you afraid of what she'll do to you?" He asked me this on live television on MSNBC. And you're laughing. I laughed too. I was like, no, I am not afraid of what Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton's career has had every tool at its disposal, from name recognition, donor networks, a loyal media class, and her own establishment brand. Yet time and again, she has used these assets not to push boundaries, but only to keep herself standing. Tulsi drives home the irony that someone with so much has never truly moved anything forward. Not policy, not discourse, not real progress for society. Gabbard's critique cuts deep because Hillary's platform was never about changing the game. It was about keeping power in the hands of those who always held it. The sharpest part of Tulsi's dismantling is how it compares authenticity with performance, with Clinton's rehearsed talking points and political training showing her as the machine, while Gabbard brings real-life stakes, the view of a soldier, and the courage to go where it hurts because she has lived through the effects of policy in a way Hillary never has. This is not just simple opposition. It is a clash between generations, between the staged politician and the scarred patriot demanding accountability. Hillary has spent her career insisting she understands the grassroots, understands the struggle, and understands the times, while Tulsi stands firm, tired but fearless, speaking truth to power instead of protecting the line. When the question is who represents the future, the one who wants to change the system, or the one who spent a lifetime guarded by it, Tulsi's answer could not be clearer, and that becomes the final blow, because Hillary Clinton, for all her ambition and fame, remains a monument to what the establishment looks like when it refuses to change, and Tulsi does not just knock her down,